What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another top 5 video. In today's top 5 video, we are going to be discussing the top 5 players that you'll wish you had drafted for the 2017 season. Before we do get into this video though, if you have not yet been to our website, check it out. It's thefantasyfootballadvice.com, and we do have a special promotion going on from Pro Football Focus, the leader in statistics for the NFL. 12.5% off of their edge packages, 10% off of their elite packages. Promo code and link to that is in the description box below. Consider getting yourself a copy today. So every year after draft day, we pick all our players and we love our teams. Well, what happens? Weeks 1, 2, and 3 hit, and you start taking a look at your roster and you start questioning why you drafted those players because there's other ones in the same range that you think you should have drafted. Well, this is a list of those players. And to start this list, we have Russell Wilson coming in at 56th overall, quarterback 5. If you do like taking quarterbacks early and don't want to miss out on some of the top talent in the early part of the draft, then Wilson's your guy. He finished last season as QB 10 while even having half of the rushing yards that he's had in the years before. We all know he was injured, and unlike many quarterbacks in this league, Wilson was able to adjust his game and stay competitive despite having that injury. How many quarterbacks do you know that would have played through an injury like that? None that I can think of, and it's especially impressive considering that half of his game is his mobility. What's clear is that Wilson's a true competitor who's been a top 3 fantasy quarterback in recent years. You're getting him at a discount this year because of his injury-plagued 2016 campaign. One thing that's definitely going in his favor is he has a great passing schedule this year. And another thing we know about Russell Wilson is he plays very good against his division, which is going to be a quarter of the games during the season. He should definitely be the first true mobile quarterback drafted in this year's draft. Wilson has never had any good receiving options, but this year it seems like all the pieces are falling into place. I expect an increase in production from Graham, being another year in this offense and another year removed from that nasty injury. Baldwin is finally showing a bit more consistency, and Lockett and Paul Richardson are two great options for Wilson to look out for. Both Lockett and Richardson match up well with Russell Wilson's style of play because he can avoid trouble, bounce to the outside of the pocket, and let the plays develop down the field. If we were to project it, we would definitely expect Wilson to throw for over 4,000 yards again this season and add another 500 rushing yards on top of that. This basically gives him a floor at around QB7. Depending on touchdowns, he could have the upside of being a top 3 QB once again in 2017. Wilson has looked great in preseason too so far, and I don't expect him to have a slow start. Especially considering his first game is against a subpar Packers passing defense, Wilson's definitely going to look to get some redemption because their last matchup he did throw 5 picks. Alright, the next player we're going to be talking about is Kareem Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs. He's coming off the board at 37 overall, RB16. Spencer Ware is out and Kareem Hunt is now a potential RB1. He could not find himself in a better situation. Typically, Kansas City is a really strong rushing team. Last year they did struggle in that area, but they still managed to finish 15th overall in rushing yards. One thing is for sure though, Ware did not look good towards the end of the season, making Hunt look like a really good late round target. And since the news broke that Ware will be out for the season, Hunt has been flying up the draft boards, and surprisingly, even for his high price tag, we still think he's a good target. There's just no other way that 15 other running backs score more fantasy points than he does on the season. This team has a great defense and likes to slow the game down. They also really never get blown out, so there shouldn't be any negative game scripts for him. All this adds up to plenty of carries for Kareem Hunt. We all knew that they liked Hunt and intended on using him because the Chiefs moved up in the draft to get him. That was actually part of the reason why Ware's ADP took a dip. Most people thought Hunt would eventually take over, and technically they were right. We just didn't think it would happen so quickly. And unlike Ware, Hunt doesn't have a truly capable back that he will have to be fighting for touches with. There is, in fact, Charkandrick West, who averaged 4 yards per carry in his breakout season in 2015, but then last year he followed that up with an abysmal 3.3 yards per carry. It's safe to say West is not a threat to Hunt's touches, making him a much safer pick. So far this preseason, Hunt has compiled 18 attempts for 79 yards and 4 receptions for 32 yards. That is some seriously solid production, and it shows that he will be used in the passing game as well. There are not that many workhorse backs in the league, and Hunt at RB16 is definitely one of them, and you should be targeting him. He will definitely help out your team in 2017. The next player we have is Eric Decker of the Tennessee Titans, coming in a whopping 92 overall, wide receiver 35. I don't understand this one. Decker has averaged 1,085 yards and 10 touchdowns the previous 4 years excluding his season he just got injured last year. He has been a player who has proven to be successful on multiple teams with multiple different quarterbacks. Do you remember how bad Fitzpatrick was last season? Well, before going out with the injury, Decker was able to compile 163 yards and 2 touchdowns in just 2 full games. Now he's moving over to Mariota, and even though it seems like a match made in heaven, you have to understand that Mariota had an outlier of a season when it came to efficiency in the red zone. While we do expect some regression, I still believe that Mariota will be one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the red zone for years to come. Decker is definitely going to help negate a portion of that regression because Decker's just a red zone animal, and he has been throughout his entire career. Now, we're not saying this is some sort of breakout candidate. We're not expecting him to flirt with wide receiver 1 numbers or anything, but Decker definitely has the upside to be a back-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. And if you think about that, that makes him basically a locked and loaded flex play each week. The only reason why his upside is capped is just because Tennessee runs the 3rd least passing plays in the entire league. There just isn't enough yardage to go around in the air. They also have the 2 stud RBs in Derrick Henry and DeMarco Murray, and they're going to feed the running backs behind one of the best offensive lines in the league this year. We think a solid projection for Decker on the season is about 70 receptions, 850 yards, and 9 touchdowns. If you grab Decker in the 8th round, you're going to get yourself a steal, and that's a fact. Okay, so the next player we have is Bilal Powell, coming off the board 52nd overall, RB20. Now, just because the fantasy community is lowering their expectations of Powell does not mean that you should too. If anything, use that as a way to get him at a better value. Powell finished last season as RB16 despite Forte only missing 2 games. It was clear that Powell was going to be used and used often in situations where the team was down. And let's be honest with ourselves, the Jets were down a ton. That's not going to change this year. They lost both Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker. We weren't very high on Enunwa either, but he was the most talented wide receiver on that team. That's really saying something considering he wouldn't even be a 3rd wide receiver on probably half of the NFL teams. Now all they're left with is Robbie Anderson as their best receiving option, and since he specializes in deep passes, those translate to very low percentage throws. In order to stay competitive, the team is going to have to utilize passing to the backfield, which is good because Powell, that's his strongest attribute to the team. I would even go as far to say Powell is the best receiver that they have on the team right now. So in comes Josh McCown. He's a journeyman quarterback who is no stranger to passing the ball to the backfield. In 2014, the last season McCown really started for 11 games. He threw for nearly 600 yards to the running backs. I'd say that you could even expect more than 600 receiving yards to go to the backfield just based on the game scripts that this team's going to have alone. They're currently in talks of trading away Forte, but even if they don't, Forte shouldn't eat into all that much of his production. And I don't even think he's going to get as many opportunities as he did last year. His role is more specifically going to be used in the goal line, and the goal line opportunities may be few and far between. Powell should get about 70% of the work between the 20s, and could have a ridiculous amount of yardage in games where they're simply outmatched offensively. His ADP has been slowly declining and can now be taken as a back-end RB2. That's an excellent value, and don't be scared that this team sucks, because while that is a problem for most running backs, it will not be an issue for Powell. I think 800 yards and another 400 receiving is something Powell can reasonably put together. He's clearly a better PPR play and won't get many touchdowns, but once the season starts, you will wish you had him as your RB2 or flex. The next player we have is Jeremy Maclin of the Baltimore Ravens, coming in 86th overall, wide receiver 36. Maclin is a player who's been falling in a ton of drafts that I've done. His post-free agency hype is long gone and his ADP is tanking. This year he comes to Baltimore where he will be primarily playing from the slot. Maclin has actually had 12 touchdowns from the slot since 2014, which is actually good for 4th in the entire league through that span. The best season a Ravens slot receiver has had for yards per route run was in 2016 by Steve Smith. It was 1.81 yards. Maclin has outperformed that in 3 of his past 4 seasons that he's played. And unlike Wallace, Maclin is a much more well-rounded player, and he will definitely be the most targeted receiver. It is a little concerning that Joe Flacco has been injured. He is losing valuable reps, something that they could use to build a connection. And what that means is that they will probably get off to a slow start. If he does get off to a slow start, and you know these are the players that you're going to be wishing that you're going to own, then he's a great buy low candidate. Target him in the early season. If he has a bad first 3 weeks, target him then. We all know the Ravens had the highest pass rush split in the entire NFL, coming in at 65% passing plays. Flacco was just one attempt shy of leading the league in passing attempts behind only Drew Brees. One attempt. What does this all mean? It essentially means Maclin is going to be a target monster, clearly making him a better PPR play, since Flacco's attempts don't really translate to a ton of yards or even a ton of touchdowns, but that doesn't mean he won't have value in both PPR and standard. He's basically being drafted as a wide receiver 4, and I think his floor is higher than that. He is the perfect player to grab for depth who should see his production increase throughout the season. Alright guys, that was the 5 players, but you know what? I got a couple more that I think you could use. So this is a top 5 list, but let's make it into a top 7. So let's talk about Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins is coming off the board, 76 overall, QB 8. Arguably the best value in the draft at the quarterback position. Cousins is coming off of a spectacular 2016 season. He finished as QB 5 and was relatively consistent throughout the entire season. He racked up over 4,900 yards to go along with 25 touchdowns and also ran in an additional 4 touchdowns. Something that I've noticed is that the rushing touchdowns actually seem to be something he's implementing into his game, which can provide game-breaking upside considering that those type of touchdowns are worth 6 fantasy points compared to 4 in most leagues, that is. In 2015 he had 5, this season he had 4. It would be fair to assume that in 2017 he will get a handful more. Now while it's disappointing he didn't hit the 5K yard mark last year, he really showed us that we haven't seen the best of him, at least not from a fantasy perspective. He's the type of player who has the potential to lead the league in passing yardage. And after adding some new pieces to this offense, he's a virtual lock to finish inside the top 10 with top 5 upside. One area of his game that he really struggled in last year, as you know, is his red zone efficiency. He was one of the worst in efficiency in the red zone. While he was 3rd in the league in passing yardage, there were still 10 other quarterbacks who had more passing touchdowns. This is an area he definitely will see improvement in this year by adding a big body like Terrell Pryor, and then hopefully getting back a healthy Josh Doctson to go along with what they have in Jordan Reed. How many games Jordan Reed will play? Probably not many till he gets injured and probably has to retire this year. But at least while he's on the field, it's going to give Cousins a significant boost. We believe that Cousins can hit that 30 touchdown mark to go along with about 4,500 passing yards. It's almost a travesty to have Cousins being taken as the 8th quarterback off the board. We originally thought that Derek Carr was going too high and that by the time the season rolled around, he would snap back to where he should be taken. But at this point in time, Carr is going off the board 1 spot higher than Cousins. Do yourself a favor, and if you're drafting a quarterback in this range, draft Cousins over Carr, please. Alright, the last player we have to talk about is Marvin Jones from the Detroit Lions. He's coming off the board 137 overall, wide receiver 50. Okay, I know, Jones is not going to lead this team in targets. That job is for Tate. But Stafford is top 10 in attempts in the league, and the lowest Detroit has ever finished in passing production since 2010 was 12th. Jones and Stafford were not on the same page last season. It showed in the amount of targets that were actually deemed catchable. It's something to be expected normally with deep threat type of players. They normally do have a lower catchable target rate, but even compared to players with a similar style, it was still remarkably low. And it really didn't make sense too, because oddly enough, Stafford was really strong in his deep ball accuracy. All that adds up to is just 2 players who were just not quite on the same page. And to be fair with Stafford, Jones didn't help anyone by dropping 7 of 62 catchable balls for a drop rate of over 10%. Now coming into this year, look for Jones to hit the ground running. I don't even expect him to have a slow start whatsoever. I am not sure why his value hasn't shot through the roof this preseason, because he already has 96 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns in just 2 appearances. It is probably because a lot of people took shares in him and he burnt a lot of people last year who drafted him, and they probably still have a bad taste in their mouth because of it. But one thing is for sure, there is no other player in this range with a higher ceiling than Marvin Jones. Don't forget, last season he was the wide receiver 1 for fantasy throughout the first 4 weeks before getting injured. While it is unlikely that he repeats that, he does have the upside of being a weekly wide receiver 2, being drafted as the wide receiver 5. Think about that and something just doesn't add up. Alright everybody, that's going to do it for this week's top 5 video. I got a couple extra in there for you. Hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please hit that like button. It really helps us grow the channel. If you're new, hit that subscribe button. We're still pumping out videos. We really hope you enjoyed, and we thank you for watching, and we will catch you on the next one.